listening to any new music? No, Charlotte, because you listen to the same shit you always listen to because it's comforting.
I was just listening to one of the first Blink-182 albums.
Oh, that is a throwback. That just sent me straight back to junior high, talking to Drew Morton about Blink-182, and I thought he was so cool because he was a little skater boy. Still is, basically. But I loved Blink-182, and he did too, and I remember talking to him about it. That's so funny.
I find that whenever I'm, like, not doing great emotionally, I regress by listening to music that comforted me when I was, like, 13, 14 years old, and it works.
Absolutely. I find that... As we know, I'm terrible at watching new movies, new shows, whatever, because my default is to go back to that comfort food.
Of course it is.
Whether it's like a horrific horror movie.
Yes.
But it was at a point in my life when I was a lot happier.
Yeah, oh my God. No, I totally get that. I do the same thing.
Oh my God.
I will listen to, like I said, Blink-182. Jack's Mannequin, Good Charlotte, Chiodos. And I look at it and I'm like, this album came out 20 years ago? What?
Yes. Well, I was talking about it with my sister, and it's my 15-year high school graduation reunion next year. 15 years. I don't look old enough to have been graduated for 15 years.
That's crazy.
Time flies. Because I've almost been out of college for a decade.
Yeah. Ugh. Isn't that why? I hate that.
Hey, but you know what? Older, wiser, more experienced.
Sure, same.
Still listening to the same music we did in grade 7. Whatever.
Life was easier then.
Anywho, hello everybody. I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
We're pretty excited, I think, for today's episode.
Yes, we are. This checks a lot of our boxes. It is old-timey. It is unsolved, and it is still very much a mystery.
Yeah, we're going to be going back over 100 years today to talk about the story of Dorothy Arnold, a New York socialite who vanished in the year 1910.
This case is no longer under investigation simply because of how long it's been since she was last seen. However, it is listed as the oldest missing persons case according to the Charley Project. That is a database that tracks over 15,000 cases.
Interesting side note, on their website, they actually talk about why they still include her story, despite the fact that it's been over a century since she was last seen. They state,
just because a person is missing doesn't mean that they didn't exist once. Really, really old cases and other cases where it's obvious the person will never be located, i.e. cases where the missing person's body is presumed to have been destroyed, are posted in part as a memorial to the missing individual. They deserve to be remembered too. The historical cases are also posted for their historical value.
Clearly, Dorothy's story is still on the minds of many people. Today, we're going to discuss who she was and what may have happened to her. At the end of the episode, we're going to share our own theories, and we invite you guys to do the same.
Comment your thoughts if you're watching this on YouTube, or tag us in your social media posts. We would also love to hear from you via email, so send us your theories at thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com.
Before we get into her disappearance, let's start off with who Dorothy was.
Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold was born in New York City on July 1st, 1885. She was one of 4 children born to perfume importer Francis Rose Arnold. He was a Harvard graduate who is well known and highly successful. Not only that, his family had actually been among those who arrived in the United States on the Mayflower.
His wife, Mary Martha Parks Arnold, was originally from Montreal. Together, they enjoyed a lavish life and were considered among the social elite.
Dorothy was highly educated. She attended Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, where she majored in literature and language, 2 of her passions. She had aspirations of becoming a successful writer. However, her family showed little support when it came to her goals.
After graduating in 1905, she continued to stay at the family home. She spent much of her time working on her writing. Despite her efforts, she saw very little success.
During the spring of 1910, she submitted a short story to McClure magazine. It was rejected. This would happen time and time again. To make matters worse, those around her teased her mercilessly. This left Dorothy feeling ashamed, and friends would later report that she considered herself a failure.
I wouldn't consider her a failure at all. In a time where women were not encouraged to be educated and have their own aspirations, she seemed pretty tenacious that she would have a story published, and she kept trying and kept trying. So to me, she was almost a pioneer of a woman at the
I
time.
think so too. And I mean, girl went to college. She was
Yes.
smart. She was independent. Like, I find that so impressive. However, I can see wanting this thing, having this dream, and everyone around you is like, no,
I
you
would
can't do that.
I hate that. The Tuscaloosa News reported her disappearance heavily. 22 years later, they would refer to her family as good natured when it came to their reaction to her work. Despite their intention, it's clear that it hurt Dorothy deeply.
During November of that year, another one of her stories was rejected. However, Dorothy wouldn't give up. She continued to write and submit stories. Unfortunately, she saw little success and was no closer to achieving her dreams.
2 months before the disappearance, she asked her father if she could move out and get her own apartment so that she could focus more on her work. He refused to let her go and told her that, and I quote, a good writer can write anywhere. She rented a post office box where she could receive and send out writing related work to avoid unwanted attention from her family.
During Thanksgiving of that year, it was reported that she went to Washington with two of her friends. A large package containing what appeared to be a rejected story was forwarded to her, and she canceled her trip and went home.
This all brings us to the morning of December 12th, 1910. Dorothy told her mother that she was going shopping. Her sister's debutante ball was coming up, and she wanted to have a new dress for the event.
Her mother offered to go along with her, but Dorothy told her she wanted to go alone. However, she promised to call if she found something she liked. At 11 a.m., she left home with about $30 in her pocket.
Which is about the equivalent to $1,000 in today's money.
Girl had cash.
I would not be comfortable walking around with $1,000 cash in my pocket.
No. I can't imagine spending $1,000 on a dress.
In cash.
In cash.
So, she certainly was rich, or at least her family was. She left that day with her hair extravagantly done and donned a large black velvet hat with 2 blue roses decorating it. She wore a well-tailored blue jacket along with a matching skirt. She accessorized all this with a fox fur piece, tan gloves, and a satin handbag.
Jewelry-wise, she wore a lover's knot style ring along with a tortoiseshell comb and lapis lazuli earrings.
She was first seen at the Park and Tilford candy store where she purchased some chocolates. Employees would report that she was in good spirits and nothing seemed out of the ordinary.
She then headed to Britanno's bookstore on 27th Street and 5th Avenue. There she purchased the book Engaged Girls Sketches, written by Emily Calvin Blake. I was curious about this book, so I looked it up. It's still available. I found a copy online and I read a few pages of it. It's basically, it was described as a set of essays in all of the articles that I found, which I was like, that's kind of odd.
Okay.
So that's why I wanted to actually read it.
Yeah.
And it's basically a series of short stories. They're about courtship, love, marriage. I wanted to know more about it because I'm like, was the book that she bought a clue, or did it, would it have anything to do with what happened later? However, like, it just seems like something most ladies her age would have been reading.
Gotcha. Just like the candy shop workers, people at the bookstore would later report that Dorothy was in a good mood and polite to those around her.
And I mean, that was a good day. She apparently bought half a pound of chocolates.
Oh, the girl was shopping. She's having a good
book.
time.
Yeah. Gonna go look at some dresses.
That, to me, that sounds like, any normal day shopping, even by today's standards.
Yeah.
You stop, you get yourself a cheeky little coffee, you get yourself a little snack, go get yourself some new clothes.
It's a good day.
It is.
Upon leaving Britanno's, Dorothy ran into a friend of hers named Marjorie King. They had a brief chat about the upcoming party, and everything seemed perfectly fine. Dorothy told her she had plans later that day to have lunch with her mother and that she intended to walk through Central Park to get to where they were meeting. The two said their goodbyes shortly after, and this was around 2 p.m.
There were no reports of her shopping for a dress, and she never met with her mother.
That evening, when Dorothy failed to return home in time for dinner, her family became worried. She was a punctual person and would normally never be late without calling.
They began to phone around to see if she had changed her plans and was maybe staying at a friend's house for the night. However, no one had spoken with her. Later in the evening, her friend Elsie Henry phoned looking for her.
Dorothy's mother told Elsie that her daughter had gone to bed early with a headache. And here's the thing, in a lot of the reports, basically what happened was she called. She's like, "Oh, is Dorothy home?" And her mom's like, "Yes, absolutely." And she's like, "Well, can I talk to her?" And she's like, no, she has a headache.
At first, now I would agree with most of what y'all are thinking.
Yes.
This is pretty sketchy for her mom to do. However, take what you know of the time.
Yeah.
Ladies were supposed to be in and at home by a certain time.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't have been looked at very nicely if her mom was like, "Oh no, she's just out all hours of the day and night."
And we have no clue where.
And we have no idea where the young lady is, right? In those days, people cared a lot more about what people thought.
Yes.
And there was a lot more like strictness and tradition and things that you had to abide by.
Being proper was very important, especially if you were from an affluent family that was well known. You wouldn't want someone gossiping about you.
Exactly.
Now, you may be thinking that once they realized she wasn't coming home that night, that they do the reasonable thing and call the police. Unfortunately, they did no such thing.
You see, like we just mentioned, the Arnolds didn't want to look bad to anyone. They thought that the whole thing would be seen as socially embarrassing, so they didn't report Dorothy as missing. Instead, they called upon a family friend, John Keith.
John was an attorney and the family trusted him. He searched her room and found nothing of note. The only things missing were her clothes from that day.
However, they did find something that may have been odd. 4 letters from George C. Griscom Jr. He was 42 years old.
Dorothy's parents knew of their friendship, but they did not approve. By some reports, she had pawned some of her jewelry on one occasion to fund a week-long stay at a hotel with George. By other accounts, they were actually in a relationship.
So maybe this is why Mama didn't want people thinking that she was out all hours of the night, because what if she was with George?
Exactly.
They also hired private investigators. They actually called on the famous Pinkerton Detective Agency. Fans of the old timey crimeys may be pretty familiar with that name. Also, if you've played Red Dead Redemption 2.
Oh, absolutely. Pinkerton searched hospitals, contacted her friends, and even went to various morgues. But Dorothy was nowhere to be found.
6 weeks after her disappearance, they finally called the police and filed a missing persons report. As the case went public, her father declared the following:
"I am firmly convinced my daughter has been killed, and I will spend every dollar I have in the world to avenge her death."
I mean, that's a pretty fair statement from her father, all things considered. He told the press that he thought she had been murdered in Central Park and that her body had been thrown into the Central Park Reservoir.
One of the things that stands out as pretty strange about that was that the police did not agree with him. They actually had no reason to believe that Dorothy was dead, and they were determined to find her alive. They also disagreed with the whole Central Park theory, saying that it was not possible. On the day that she vanished, the reservoir was frozen solid.
This seems pretty sus to me. Why would Dad be adamantly telling everyone, "Nah, she's definitely dead, and she fell in the lake"?
It's interesting. We'll get to this a little bit later, but her mom was the total opposite. Her mom was like, "My daughter is alive. I know she's alive." But the dad, he was just like, "She dead."
I wonder if it was a source of pride for him, because perhaps in his mind, and this is going to sound harsh, it was better to him that she was dead rather than off gallivanting with some strange man that they did not approve of.
I don't think you're that far off, because again, you have to remember, public perception was everything. He was this big perfume tycoon. His family was well known. He was well known.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want
Scandal.
Yes, exactly. And it was very much about the scandal. That's why when he was interviewed, like when the police talked to him, when the press talked to him, he hated that.
I bet he did. The police did search the area when it melted, but they came up with nothing. Francis told the press afterwards that he had two major clues that made him believe that this was the case, but would not share what they were.
Despite all of this, he offered a $1,000 reward for information that would help lead them to Dorothy.
Police spread the word about her disappearance, and the press reported on it heavily. Her picture was shared all over throughout the US, Canada, and even Mexico.
This resulted in a number of false leads, as well as 2 ransom notes that also proved to be fraudulent. The family also received a postcard with the words, "I am safe," written on it. The writing appeared to match Dorothy's. However, her father believed that this was also a cruel joke and that someone had just copied her writing.
During a press conference, he was asked if Dorothy could have run off with a man. To this, he replied,
"I would have been glad to see her associate more with young men than she did, especially some young men of brains and position, one whose profession or business would have kept him occupied. I don't approve of young men who have nothing to do."
That seems to say a lot without saying nothing at all.
Right?
On April 10th, 1910, the Gazette-Times quoted him by saying,
"I believe my daughter is dead. I believe she died the day she disappeared or almost immediately afterward. The one theory to which I have always leaned is that she was kidnapped and made away with in a short time."
He's getting sussier and sussier as the story goes on.
I think if your child disappeared, would you not want to hold out all hope that they were still alive, that they were okay? I feel like just being like, you know what? She's dead.
People deal with grief and trauma in very different ways. Just because someone's not sobbing and being hysterical about something doesn't mean that they're not feeling it deeply. However, again, doth the lady protest too much?
It's odd.
It is. Before we go ahead and blame her father absolutely completely, we do want to add that he spent roughly $250,000 in a search for his daughter until the day he died. That's almost $7 million today. Her mom believed that her daughter was alive and would continue to believe that for the rest of her days.
A telegram was sent to George Grissom Jr., who was vacationing in Italy at the time. He denied knowing anything about her whereabouts. Dorothy's mother and brother actually went to Italy to talk to him further, but he maintained that he had no clue where she was.
When they asked to see the letters that she had written him, he said they contained nothing important and had been destroyed. He maintained that he cared for her deeply and told them that he planned to propose to her with her mother's approval whenever she showed up.
Her mother stated to reporters that she would give no such thing. In fact, the Times also reported that their lawyer did not deny any reports that her brother
struck Grissom in the face with his fist and followed the blow up with another that floored Grissom, securing his sister's letter, which Grissom had kept in his pocket.
As for the press, many reports vilified him mercilessly. One described him by writing,
"He was hardly the type to sweep a girl off her feet or rescue her from a stifling existence. Instead, he seemed desperately in need of rescuing himself. He was George C. Grissom Jr., a plump, side-burned 42-year-old that lived with his elderly parents in Pittsburgh and summered at Nantucket. Grissom urged all whom he met to call him Junior. When his parents traveled, he invariably accompanied them. One report said his doting mother still bought all his shirts and ties." Aw, he was a mummy's boy.
He was. Here's the thing, going back to what her dad said about, I would love to see her out with boys if they had jobs, if they were busy, all of that, I feel like is a dig at him. I really do.
100% it is. There's no doubt in my mind that he may as well have said, Junior is fat, lazy, and doesn't do anything.
Yeah, exactly. After 75 days, the police declared that they would cease investigations regarding her disappearance and that they too believed she was dead.
Various sightings would continue to be reported over the years, but none of them led to Dorothy Arnold.
So, what actually happened to her?
Well, as it turns out, there's some pretty decent theories out there.
For starters, it is known that her failure to get work as a writer was eating away at her. George Grissom Jr. stated that he believed Dorothy may have died by suicide. He received a letter from her after her second McClure rejection stating,
"McClure's has turned me down. Failure stares me in the face. All I can see ahead is a long road with no turning. Mother will always think that an accident has happened."
would that be possible?
Personally, I don't think it's out of the question. And for those of you that might say, hey, she was happy, she bought chocolates that day, she was having a good time. Yes, you might indicate that this is someone that was not suicidal or depressed.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't mean that at all. Many folks, when they have made the decision to end their lives, act remarkably happy.
Yeah.
So much so that obviously people are confused and shocked and didn't see their death coming.
Yeah.
A person's emotional state doesn't necessarily, I should say, a person's outward emotional state does not always indicate what is going on internally. So, yes, I think it could be. We do know that she was devastated over her failed career as a writer. But again, there's really no proof to back this up.
Another popular theory was that Dorothy had slipped on some ice, hit her head, and developed amnesia. However, as we stated before, various institutions were visited. Those involved in the investigation followed up on countless leads regarding women matching her description to no avail.
Many believe that Dorothy had died due to a botched abortion and that her body had been disposed of.
That was definitely something that happened during this time. The theory does have a lot of merit to it, in my opinion. And in 1916, an illegal clinic in Pennsylvania was raided by the police. A doctor by the name of C.C. Meredith was arrested along with his nurse, Lucy Orr.
The clinic was in the basement of a house, and investigators were shocked when they discovered 2 furnaces capable of cremating human beings.
The house was well known too. Many women were reported to have gone in, only never to be seen again. Locals dubbed it the House of Mystery.
Mystery seems a little too gentle for a butcher shop.
Right? And
House of Horrors, maybe.
I'm going to go back, oh my God, 110 episodes, 109 episodes. Black Dahlia.
Yes.
That is one of the theories with what happened to her, was that it was a botched abortion. And that was something that happened
all the time.
Often
all
back
the
then.
Time. You're probably wondering at this point what this all has to do with New York. Well, a Dr. Lutz was also arrested for his involvement with the clinic. He told the New York district attorney that a well-known woman from New York had been to his clinic but was never seen again.
The DA actually believed him when he said this. However, Frances Arnold called the theory ridiculous and untrue. And
of course they would.
Yes.
Because it's scandalous as hell.
That is very scandalous.
Whether she passed away from a botched abortion or what have you, in their minds, or rather at least in her father's mind, better to disown it altogether and say, nope, she's dead, rather than bring up the scandal that a failed, or I should say a botched abortion caused.
I hate to be completely vile here, but I think in his mind, it's better to say, oh, she was attacked brutally, she was killed, she was a victim. Whereas in his mind, her dying from a botched abortion makes her the bad guy. And I truly think that's how they thought back then.
I would not doubt it in the slightest.
Which, how fucking terrible.
That's, you know what, not to get off on too much of a tangent, there's still a lot of people that have this kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And all it does is it ends up with more women dying, basically. In 1916, a man named Edward Glenoris spoke to authorities about something that he needed to get off his chest. He was serving time in Rhode Island and confessed that he had been hired by a man named Little Louis in December of 1910 to pick up a woman from a house in New Rochelle and bring her to West Point.
I wouldn't trust a guy called Little Louis one bit. I just picture him like he's flipping a coin on the street corner, smoking a cigarette with a little hat.
Yeah, or he's got like a toothpick hanging out of his mouth or something.
Little Louis said that 2 men met with him. One called himself Doc, and the other matched the description of George Grissom Jr. The men brought out an unconscious woman, and they drove her to New Jersey. He also claimed that little Louie told him that this was Dorothy Arnold.
He described a ring that she was wearing, and it matched the description of the one that Dorothy wore. The following day, he claims that he was called back to New Jersey and was told to finish the job.
It was explained to him that the woman had died during a surgery. He then drove her back to New Rochelle, where he buried her in a basement.
If this theory sounds like it may be it, I'm sorry, but there's a major issue. Shortly after he gave this statement, he completely changed his mind and denied ever saying or seeing any of this.
He basically told this huge story, and they were like, holy shit,
This is it.
This has to be it. And then when they questioned him further, like a few days later, he was like, what? I never said such a thing. So in my mind, I'm wondering, we know people often make false confessions for attention or whatever the case might be. He could have read about these details. He could have made up the story, whatever. Or was he threatened? Was he told, hey, you know what? Don't talk about this. Shut your fucking mouth. Don't you dare. I mean, at the end of the day, the family had money. And like you said, great shame about her dying in this kind of a way. They could have paid someone off to threaten him in jail. I don't know. I don't want to get off like on too far of a tangent there, but there's so many different directions that this could go. Because at first I was like, why would he do that?
Well, I think it could go one of two ways. Either someone paid him to shut up, or someone very rich and powerful was like, you keep your mouth shut, or I will make sure you do not see another day.
Yeah,
so
it's possible.
It's very possible. In 1921, the former head of the New York Department of Missing Persons, one Captain John H. Ayres, was giving a lecture when he said the following.
All that I can say is that it has been solved by the department. Dorothy Arnold is no longer listed as a missing person. Her parents, relatives, and friends who had been led to follow in all directions, clues sent in, multitudes of letters, suddenly ceased their activity.
The Arnold family lawyer responded to his claims with the following.
Captain Ayres seems to intimate that the mystery of Dorothy Arnold's disappearance has been solved, and that the family for some reason has kept the solution a secret. The whole thing is a damned lie.
Captain Ayres took back this statement the following day.
So there's a pattern here.
There's someone going around being like, shut your mouth and take it back.
And it's working.
And it's clearly working.
Because he basically did this lecture, and then when, the following day, he's like, oh, you misunderstood what I said. That's not what I said.
That's not what I meant at all. So what really happened to Miss Dorothy Arnold?
It really does seem like she vanished into thin air. What do you think?
Okay, I have two thoughts on this.
Let's hear it.
One, Daddy didn't like the way we were acting, and Daddy took us out.
Okay.
That seems pretty bold, but there's a few ways that could have played out. Or Dorothy was like, fuck y'all. I'm going to be a writer, whether it's the Arnold name on me or not. I'm just going to disappear. See you later. I feel like she had the wits about her to do it. She had $30, $1,000 on her. That could get you a long way in those days.
It could.
She was rich. She was influential. I think if Dorothy Arnold took it upon herself to disappear and reinvent herself, I think she absolutely could have. However, I have a sneaking suspicion that Mr. Arnold, Daddy-O, was at play here in one way or another, whether he was directly to blame for her death or disappearance, or whether he, because of his adamance that she had died, or it was much more simple than everyone was making it out to be, that he limited the investigation and gave up. She very well could have still been alive somewhere, and they just didn't get to her in time.
And we've talked about this before, but back in the day, you could just go to the next town over. I mean, they were reporting it in Mexico and Canada and everything, but cut your hair a little different, dress differently, dress like more of a common person rather than a rich socialite,
Throw
change
on
your
an
name.
accent, cut your hair.
Yeah.
Boom, you're a whole other person.
I'm Arnolda Dorothy.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Deep down, because it makes me sad because it seemed like she was this baddie that had so much potential and she had aspirations. I really hope that she did. She was like, fuck y'all, I'm gonna go do my thing. And I hope that she thrived. I hope that she wrote under a different name.
Oh, I know.
I hope she did well. The cynical person in me thinks that that's probably not the case. But I want to believe so bad that she thrived the rest of her life and just left the family behind.
I'm with you. That's my theory that I hope that's what happened. I hope she was like, you know what? You guys don't support me.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really act like you like me all that much.
You make fun of me. You belittle my career choice.
I'm going to go be a writer somewhere else under a different name and live my best life. My second theory, unfortunately, is so there's a lot of information out there about her, but also not a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had to do a lot of dig deep. I had to do a lot of deep digging for this one, old newspapers, things like that, because there's not really a lot available. So what I wonder is some people describe her relationship with George Jr. as a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have they stayed in a hotel together. That's a fact. They were in a hotel together for a week. She pawned a bunch of jewelry so that they could do this, whatever. Was she sexually active during a time where you shouldn't be doing that before you're married?
Yeah.
Probably was. He was 42. You know, I'm sure that could have been happening. So maybe she did get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she knew that the family would disown her or they would not be for that relationship and for you that would be the biggest scandal you could think of.
Yes.
Maybe she did get an abortion and maybe that is what happened. I think realistically, I think that could be it.
It very well could be. It also then ties into the fact that when Dorothy's mother and brother went to see him in Italy, he was like, well, I haven't seen her, but let me tell you, when I do, I'm going to propose.
Right?
Because of course that would shut down her mom immediately. And she'd be like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And then she would leave it at that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that Mr. George Jr. is completely innocent in all of this. I think the unfortunate fact of a botched abortion could have, it's possible.
And not to defend him, but let's defend him. He could have not known.
True enough.
You know what I mean? Like in his mind, maybe she did go missing for a bit and she was just going to come back. Maybe she had talked about running away before in her letters or whatever the case was.
Well, and that would explain why he was like, no, there's nothing of importance. I destroyed them.
Right? Exactly. But perhaps she got pregnant and she didn't tell him and she was just going to quietly deal with it and then return back. And that was the plan.
Oh,
we just don't know.
And it happened so long ago. Like we say, this is a missing case that is older than a century.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is we're not likely to find her remains.
No.
And I think even less getting answers, to be honest.
I think that anyone who could have talked either was too scared to talk, was paid to not talk, or just never said anything and they are long gone now.
Long gone. On the bright side, I hope that she did run away and she lived her best life. I know that's like believing in Santa and the Tooth Fairy, but these stories are so grim, for lack of a better term, that I try to look for the silver lining, even if there maybe isn't one.
I do too. That being said, what do all of you listening think? Like we mentioned at the start of the episode, please let us know. Send us an email to thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com with your theories. Tag us on Twitter and Facebook with your thoughts. And if you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments because I am genuinely curious. And also, with that being said, I will admit finding information, like I said, was hard. If I missed something, let me know because I want to know what happened.
I'm curious to know, with the Arnold family being that sort of high-level elite they came across on the Mayflower, surely the Arnold family is still very much an institute today, I would imagine.
They could be.
I would imagine. So, we're talking a few generations down the line now, but that familial wealth typically doesn't just disappear overnight.
It
so
does not.
I'm sure the Arnold family are still very much an institution in New York's elite. Perhaps, I don't know.
And if you are from the Arnold family, talk to us.
Yeah, I want to know. I want to know your thoughts on your sordid family.
Yes, please. That would be so convenient.
Absolutely. All right. Well, of course, we are at that time of the episode where once again we give a shout out to all of our Grim VIPs over on Patreon. That is our top tier. We have a couple other tiers, but these are the guys that get the shout out on the episodes.
Yeah, they do. If you want to support us on Patreon, but you don't want to pay for it, we have a free tier. You get early episode reveals. So please check that out. You don't have to pay. Just get yourself involved on Patreon. It would be super cool. But with that being said, those VIPs are, and we thank you, Atlantean Jedi, Bob, Brian, Hillary, Kevinus Musicus, Lisa, Mayhem Mudkip, and Steven Centauri.
Thanks, gang. You're the best.
We appreciate you.
We sure do. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been The Grim Curriculum.
My fact is interesting.
Oh, all the best ones are.
Right? This was, I don't know. I don't like this, but I mean, it makes sense. So during the Victorian period,
yes,
mourning was a strict thing. There,
yes.
There was
goes on for years.
Exactly. Yeah. So a widow mourned for 2.5 years, while a widower only mourned for 3 months.
It's presumably so he could get his next hot young new wife to come take over the family.
Yep, just 3 months. Okay, I'm done.
I don't think I've mourned anything for 2.5 years. Let alone a man that's not even going to mourn me for 3 months.
Right?
Bitches.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, fuck that. And then they have to wear black and wear their veils.